Volume warning be advised.
So, he's in the Corinthians time, right? And the Corinthians back then had what? They had slaves. Now, the things with this
Okay. Now for the matters you wrote about. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Okay, what in the world? But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his material duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married, I give this command, not I but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband, and a husband must not divorce his wife. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children will be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. If the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or the sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife?
Oh, do I start now? Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become circumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's command is what counts. Each person should remain in the situation that they were in when God called them. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although, if you can gain your freedom, do so. For the one who is a slave when called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who is free when called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of human beings. Brothers and sisters, each person, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Now, about virgins. I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do you not seek to be released? Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as they do not. Those who mourn as if they did not. Those who are happy as if they were not. Those who buy something as if as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use things of the world, as if not engrossed by them. For this world in its present form is passing away. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone is worried about that he might not be acting honorably toward the virgin he is engaged to, and if his passions are too strong, and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sitting. They should get married. But the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man is also doing the right thing. So then, he who marries a virgin does right, but he who does not marry does better. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God.
Thank you, Colin and Ben, for reading. Thank you, Luke, for praying us in. So as they have just read here, we've seen that Paul has not given these as commands for the Corinthians, but rather these sort of not guidelines, because he's not trying, like I said, not trying to command it, but just sort of like a helpful, like, oh well, this will be better, this might be better. You don't have to do this, and if you do this, and just help them set this straight, just to clear up some disputes that they've been having. Since recently, the problem was for them is that if you turn back, there was he says basically flee from sexual immorality in chapter 6. And the problem is that the Corinthians back then, they're having trouble setting their sights fully on God, and they're going to be engrossed in the world as such. They were in this giant commercial place, which everything was kind of available to them, and they were used to this luxurious lifestyle. He tells them, like, y'all guys are like the leaven in the bread. Y'all guys are so puffed up in y'all's own sin and shame. So they send him a question. He says, now concerning the matters about which you wrote. So they wrote him a question among others, but one of them was, here it says it as a statement, but I'm gonna read it as a question. Is it good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman? So that's what they write to Paul. Kind of like, is it not the best that a man does not marry at all, or that a woman does not marry at all? Is that not the best? And Paul's like, because not to give a command, he's just like, well, from what from my own judgment, and from, well, because there's not a whole lot of old texts, old scriptures, a whole lot about on the marriage aspect. It's just more of a in the beginning, God made man and woman, they are to be one flesh. I mean, all you have is that they are to be uh married one. There really isn't much of the guidelines there. So he's not going to try and set this as a rule. He's not going to be the trailblazer in this scenario, but he's just trying to help them dispute this. And so he kind of just helps them a little bit. He's saying, well, because of the temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. Because the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And it's one of those things where he outlined the last chapter saying, like, don't go into sexual immorality, and because he was just examining, like, outlining it's not good to let it cloud your judgment and not focus on the Lord. But the fact that there is sexual immorality, saying, well, the best way to combat it is to have a husband, is to have a wife, because when you're in that oneness, when you're in that togetherness, when you're in that what was made to be by the Lord, well, then the what you do with your wife, what you do with your husband, isn't going to be sexual immorality if you did what you did with a prostitute, or you did what you did with um a stripper, or what you did, or you looked at someone with a lustful passion. It helps fends it off. Yes, Mason.
This reminds me of when Paul talks about for those who need a wife or a spouse, then you can have one. But for those who don't get one. Like Paul has spent his life without a wife, but Peter was married. We know he was. So Peter was able to thrive in his ministry with a wife. Paul found it unnecessary and didn't need one, so he did his ministry alone. The important aspect of that, though, is whether or not the wife will benefit you in your ministry or not.
Yeah. Because getting married and all the things, yeah, that will be outlined in what Paul said, and not just this chapter, but other chapters. But and whether you're going to be married or not, it is God. That's in God's will, which He'll say too. Because the thing is, we think that we need to be married, or we see non-marriage as like as a shameful thing. You're like, oh, I'm gonna die alone. I'm gonna die a virgin. No, but it really depends if if marriage is gonna either help you or hinder you in your mission field with God. Because um like, think about it like this. Think about it like this. If you're a missionary, right, and your husband or your wife isn't a missionary, well, think how hard it will be to maintain a relationship. If you're like, I want to get married, and you get married, but you're going over to, like, you're international missionary, and you go to these other places, and you're out for long periods of time, leaving your partner at home for long periods of time, and you're not helping that relationship well. If Because God may have destined for you, I want you to be international missionary, go preach to these people. But since you got married, now not only are you trying to be that, but you're also trying to be a good partner, which is hard to do because God's called you to do this, but you thought maybe also, I should do this, and it creates all these different responsibilities and choices, and it's not working out as much as you wanted to. Yes, Mason.
That reminded me of, so recently my teacher had us do a comparison between John Wesley and Jonathan Edwards and their married life versus their what's it called, ministry life, right? So John Wesley decided to get married because he believed that's what God wanted him to, but he married a woman he barely knew for a week and left her at home and went off to do ministry stuff. Uh, and their marriage, because of that, was really bad. And it sometimes messed with the way he spoke to his uh, congregations and things like that. It was difficult to take him for what he was saying was true based off of the way his marriage was going, the way people saw that happen. So that whenever he gave marriage advice, people found it difficult to believe him. And then there was Jonathan Edwards, who knew his future wife for a while, who knew her for, I think, 4 years before they got married. And then he took his wife with him wherever he went. Like, if he went to a different church to preach, his wife there with him, and things such as that. And they continued to grow together in their ministry and things like that. So their marriage was a better example, and Jonathan Edwards was able to use that as a better example to those he was teaching. So
Yeah.
yeah, just to further your point.
Yeah, because it's not like God it's not like God's trying it's not like it's like, no, you shall forever be alone. It's just like, I'm not trying to make a inconvenience to you and the mission that I have you to do. There's a reason. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, well, because what you're saying kind of goes with what, like verses 32 to 35, it's not a bad thing to get married, but like sometimes, it's another concern and can get in the way of things, or it just divides your attention, you know, because
Yeah,
you're not having to worry about just yourself, you're having to worry about your spouse and children and, whatever. So
because
it's not a bad thing, it's just it can divide your attention,
yeah,
is what Paul is trying to say.
he says, like the unmarried gives like the full attention to God, but the married
Because they have
has
no
to give
other like
attention to the
priorities,
to like to the home, to the kids, to the
responsibilities.
wife, to the responsibilities that he has. And Paul's setting these principles for the marriage, like, well, if you're going to get married, well, here's, because he's speaking to the married now. He's saying, well, if you're going to get married, because like, if the unmarried is focusing on God, there's also the use of the temptation that Satan uses of sexual immorality and lust and possessions and all that stuff that he can use on that. And he's saying, okay, well, if you feel like you cannot handle that alone, and that you're struggling with that, yes, marriage is a good option. He's not, and he's, it's kind of like, well, take it up with God, pray about it first, but marriage is an option, that is there. But he's saying, there's always, that small fine print now. He's saying, okay, well, if you're married, you got to remember these things. You can't deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now it's a concession, so kind of like, let me help you understand this claim that I'm making
Advice.
here. Yeah, this advice, like I said, not a command. I say this: I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one kind and of another. Because he's gonna hit all these different types of people: married, unmarried, virgin, and betrothed, and all the other stuff. But yeah, there's this list of responsibilities if you do get married. But he talks to the unmarried. He says, to the unmarried and the widows I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. So he's putting emphasis, like, it's, in my judgment, I think it is better to remain single because you focus more on God, like I have. But when he says as I am, he's not saying like, see how I am single, singles away, but more as, like, well, you see how God has done more of my life, that I was single, not because single was a choice, but being single led me to the other things that God has me to do. Because if I wasn't, those would have been closed off because I had to worry about so many other things. Because he says later, I want y'all to be free of anxiety. That's why he tells the unmarried and the widows, it's best for you to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. And it's just that, like, look, I get it, if you cannot, like I have, or like, because it wasn't just Paul, a lot of people experience singleness, but like, if you can't, go marry. Because it right now, it's not a matter of, I think this is better, I think that is better. It's more of saving your soul from, from the sin and the temptation that Satan's putting on your life. Go get married. And he says to the married, then, I give this charge. So another little set, of rules, kind of a thing. He's saying, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. Just, like, okay, if the unmarried or the widows, or the virgins, like, okay, I can't remain single. All right, you get married. Okay, that's cool. But y'all guys gotta stick together, because otherwise, what do y'all make the vows for? Nothing. Y'all become this one being. Y'all become one in Christ. Stick together. Now he does say, like, should she shouldn't separate, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. Because sometimes we make impulsive decisions. We think, oh, I can't do this by myself, and then, like you're saying, like those two traveling missionaries, like, and boom, 1 week, okay, get married, and he's gone. He made the wrong decision, right? And you're saying, like, all right, don't get separated, and, like, don't separate. But if you do, I say, the Lord says, two options, remain unmarried or come back to your husband, because either you're gonna, either, as you've already done, pledge to your husband, you're gonna come back to your husband, or you stay unmarried because you messed up. You understand that, and don't try to all of a sudden don't try to play with other men and or other women. Don't try to do any of that. You've already pledged here, and if you're gonna break that off, stay. And because, like you said, he's not trying to set rules, he's just trying to set principles, and it's kind of hard. It's that kind of topic. And I'm no marriage counselor. I haven't really, I'm not well versed in that kind of political correctness right there. But we see a few things that Paul's trying to help them understand, and it helps us too, because he says this: to the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. And as children, right here, it says here, you remain faithful, because as we're children, our parents, they have influence on our life too. So it's not like this privilege stuff, this marriage stuff affects just the person who's reading it. It's affected people before you, and it will affect people after you, because not only will you being faithful, if we get married, not only will that affect the faithfulness of ourselves, if because he's told them in last chapter, are you to make members of a prostitute? Are you to go get married with someone who isn't a believer? He's telling, like, don't do that. So he's saying, if you do have a wife or a husband, so the people who in Corinth who were already married before Paul sent this, and they were unbelievers, but either the husband or the wife became a believer during that time, they're like, do I break it off because you said, don't be married to unbelievers, but I loved him, I loved her, what should I do? He's like, well, stay with them, and try to make peace, because that's also a thing, but stay with them if you can, because your act of faithfulness, your being of an example could potentially save your husband or your wife who is an unbeliever. And it could also show your kids what true faithfulness looks like, looking at the Lord and showing them. And Paul's like, even though I'm single, I've shown y'all what an influence faithfulness has done, and y'all seen that, because the reason why y'all here in this church is because y'all understood this faithfulness and y'all wanted to follow it too. And he's saying, don't give it up just because your husband or your wife is an unbeliever, but keep in that faith even in marriage, because there's a possibility that you could save by being in that example. Yes, Mason.
I was gonna say that it doesn't only, like you were saying, it doesn't only affect the two that are in the marriage. Once they have kids, right, they look to the adults to see how they should act and basically what their partner should look like. So I want someone like my mom, because I love my mom and my mom's great. So I'm gonna find someone who acts like my mom, who acts the same as her, who that I know that I'll get along with, right? So if one, like, let's say the dad's acting bad, right? The dad isn't doing what he should. The daughter will look at him and then find someone like him. The same will happen for the mom. If the mom isn't acting right, isn't following Christ correctly, then the son will find someone like that as well. So due to that, being a good example in front of your kids, making sure you have the character and the way to act is a good way to help your kids out for their future dating choices.
So he was telling them about the brother with an about the brother with an unbelieving wife and the with the sister with the unbelieving husband, that they should stay together. But then he also gives the charge, because of course if there's one scenario, the opposite scenario can also happen. He tells them, but if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace, right? He's not saying you should complicate the situation, but be at peace. And he's like, y'all guys over in Corinth, y'all guys decided to be married and this and that, and then y'all came to Christ, which is such a great thing. But don't think you are now you're a servant to your husband or your wife because of the situation you're in. Don't think you have to give a price now to make sure you're still with peace of God. Because the one thing is that it's like, okay, stay with your partner, and if they believe to Christ, if they come to Christ and y'all both Christians now, that's the best outcome. Second outcome is you stay true to the faith. They don't believe and they separate. But knowing what you should do, you stay faithful and just peace. Let it go your separate ways, because that that's how it has to happen. But what shouldn't happen is that you say, "Oh, this could break our marriage," and leave Christ and forget that and say, I love you, my partner, and I'm not gonna forget you. They're talking weird stuff over that church, and I believe them, but I don't want you to leave me." That is what shouldn't happen, because at that point, y'all both forsaking God, and then the next generation is not gonna know anything about God, and after that, well, who knows? It's gonna be a whole downhill spiral from there. That's why he says, stay, and if they leave, let them leave. He calls you to peace, because he says, for how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? And how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Because if you are together, there's a possibility that y'all become oneness together in Christ, not just this physical relation that y'all think y'all need to have. Because at some point, you don't think at marriage for just sex. You think about it as building a relationship with your partner to glorify God, saying, God has blessed me with this beautiful wife. God has blessed me with this handsome husband, and we're both of us now are going to glorify God, not just one of each other separate individuals. Now we're going to become together as God has willed it, and it's going to glorify Him. Yes, Mason.
That this is where it comes into play. Basically, how the importance of marrying someone you're equally yoked to, because then you would avoid the situation entirely. Like, if you that obviously has to occur if you're a Christian beforehand, but still, if you are Christian beforehand, just avoid marrying somebody who isn't, because that'll just cause problems between your relationship with God, your relationship with your spouse, and so on and so forth. But yeah, if you guys are not equally yoked, then you'll either bring them down or they'll bring you down, or you'll just make it more difficult on each other, and that's not how it should work. And if you aren't this basically applies to people who weren't saved, then got saved while being in a marriage with someone who isn't saved. So yeah.
Yeah. Which goes to show what he's gonna say in this next part, because what he's telling them is, like, okay, if this is that, then this is this, and this is that, then this. But if this happens, that's that. And right now, he tells them, y'all guys are overthinking this. And to bring that out more, he basically tells them in the next part, just live as you are called. Simple as that. He continues in 17. Only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, and to which God has called him. Now it's not just like, okay, here's a suggestion. He's saying, like, okay, set this as a ground rule. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Were you a bondservant when called? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a free man of the Lord. Likewise, he who was free when called is a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. So, brothers and sisters, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. It it gives a sort of sense of peace, saying, y'all guys really don't have to overthink this. It's all in God's will. He's the master planner. Let time take its course and let God do with you what he has you to do, because there's many things that he has for you to do, and it's only when you listen to him that you can get it done. If marrying is in there, then Mary is in them. But if it's not, then it's not. But we'll see. Like, yes, Ben.
Well, I mean, basically, what I feel like you're saying is you don't have to change for God. You know, you don't have to change your situation, your circumstances, anything about you for God, but instead let God change you. That's what I got from that little section.
Yeah, and you can kind of learn from that, because like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do this. Well, God, well, if you were in this situation, think of it like, well, you don't need to just go out and become all of a sudden, this. Well, look, Esther was a freaking what's like just a modest girl in her house and became a queen to satisfy the king, right? He's like, well, you don't need to go from this modest girl to a queen to appeal to me. I can use you however you are, and I will use you however you are. You just need to present yourself willingly and say, I will go wherever you need to send me to go. You have that sense of going, then I will send you where I need you to go. That's my sense.
I would have a question. So, this entire passage, or most of it, is talking about marriage and relationships and stuff like that. So, why did Paul decide to put in verses 14 through 24? No, 17 through
17,
24.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 17 through 24.
Oh, 17 through 24.
Yeah.
All right. Here's why. From my understanding, because okay. So he says this because think about it. Right now, Paul isn't in our time, right? He's in his time. He's in the Corinthian time. He's talking to Ben. You didn't even give me a chance to explain yet, my boy. What do you want?
Keep going. Keep
All
going.
right, I'll keep going.
Volume warning be advised.
So he's in the Corinthians time, right? And the Corinthians back then have what? They had slaves. Now, the things with this was that he with using the first verse, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. Because he says this because the thing with marriage is that, what do you do when you meet someone? Do you act the same as you were before, or do you kind of switch it up so you can get with them? What do you think? Yeah, you switch it up. Yeah,
I'm generally
you try to
friends
act
with
a
the
little bit
first.
different.
Okay.
You try to be this. You try to be like, oh no, I don't know who that person was the past 5 seconds. Me here now. Oh yeah, we're going places. We're doing something different. I'm a changed man with you, baby. And to put in art, they you put, you dress differently, you style your hair different, you look good for girls, you put on makeup, and you whatever girls do, I'm not a girl, I don't worry about this stuff, I just throw on a shirt and shorts and all that stuff. But he's like, y'all guys got to understand with this thing, because marriage is a good thing to flee, it is a good way to relieve yourself of sexual immorality when you have the husband, when you have a wife to help you with that, because when the wife is over your body, and the husband is over the wife's body, and that's how that works. But you gotta understand something. Y'all don't need to change y'all circumstances to work with God here, because when he tells him, was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised or uncircumcised, and then vice versa, you try to get this changed. because the Corinthians were not Jews. So when they got married and when they tried to go in the church, they try to they tried to appeal more to the Jews because the Jews had all these sets of laws, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not a Corinthian, then I'm gonna try and be a Jew. I gotta do this. I gotta act different. I gotta make sure I don't work on the Sabbath, or I get arrested. I'm gonna become like Jesus, and I'm gonna heal someone." No, but like they were trying to like switch up everything entirely because like, oh, I can't be a Christian without acting like a Jew, and that's a problem, right? Can't, and Paul's like, no, they don't, they don't. God will use you how He will use you. Look, you may be uncircumcised. That's fine because uncircumcision wasn't circumcision wasn't something you need to do. That was for Abraham. That was for Isaac. That was for them to understand that God has made a promise there that for him and his descendants and all this. But right now, we're under a new ruling. We're under grace, right? We're not under the sacrificing. We're not under the commandments, as it were, because he's saying all that circumcision stuff. Well, that's under the keeping the commandments of God. We're under grace. He's saying, as you would a partner, you don't need to switch up. You don't need to change. You don't think you need this because something like, oh, I need a partner to do this. I need to marry someone. You don't need to. God can use you as you were. That's why he says in 17, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. Because whether it be marriage or whether it be living your life, God has these set things that He has made for you, and it helps to understand that they don't also need to live a whole new lifestyle as the Jews should and do, but like as it says, they are called as they are called. And because I mean he also addresses the servants. He's saying, "Were you a bond servant when called? Do not be concerned about it." He's saying, "You don't need to, like I said with Esther, you don't need to be a queen. You don't need to be a king. You don't need to be someone of high status to be important to God. He will use you as He will use you. If I haven't said that enough, He will use you as He will use you." He's saying, in Christ, if you were a bond servant, you're a free man. You're a free man. You're a free woman. You're a free man. In fact, someone said on Tuesday, Mason, man, you missed it, man. On Tuesday, at the Bible study we were having at school, we were in Acts chapter 22 or 21 or something like that. And Paul's in shackles. He went to Jerusalem. He's in shackles, and someone says, even though Paul was in shackles, the only one in shackles, because he's being dragged away. Even though Paul was the only one in shackles, even while everyone else was shouting at him, "Take him away!" Even though Paul was the only one in shackles, he was the freest one there. Me and Jose, we looked at each other. Ooh, that's a good one-liner. Because think about it: if you're a bondservant, then even physical, spiritually, you're free. You're free with Christ, because it came as a price, as he said. You were bought with a price. And he says, well, if you were free, well, what did Jesus tell that one man? Oh, okay, you're a rich ruler. Okay, well, sell all your possessions. Because sure, you're free, but if you're free now, all right, then in Christ, you're a servant to Christ. You're a bondservant to Him. If you're a bondservant now, you're free. And when you're free, you're a bondservant to Christ. He tells them, you don't need to switch up because you will be free regardless of your worldly status, whether you are a Jew, whether you are someone low, whether you are someone high, you will be free. And when you're going to become free, you're going to be a servant of Christ, no matter where you stand. Because in whatever he says, and in 24, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. So that answered that question. Where were we? Okay, so the last little bit. So again, with the principles of this married stuff, because he's hit the married people. Now he's got to hit the unmarried and the widow, because he kind of touched them a little bit before. Now he's got to hit them full.
I don't know. I just feel like he's like restating everything he just said.
Yeah, I know, right? It's kind of like what I do. He just does it for me. So he tells them, now concerning the betrothed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in the view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who had mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. To the unmarried and the widow, basically tells them, as I am, just like Ben said, he's kind of restating himself, but he's adding a little bit more. But he says, it's good that y'all remain unmarried. I would think so. And the betrothed woman or the virgin, it's fine. It's not because the thing is, like, back then, like, it's shameful to not marry by this age. Well, not really, like with Christ, he's got his own plans. There's no rushing things here. Yes, Mason.
I got a question.
Yes.
So Paul's basically, is he telling us not to feel at all in this section?
Okay. That is so that's a good question, right? And that is what a lot of people think. That's been addressed before. I was reading about that. I completely forgot what the other guy said, but I can come to terms with judgment that that's not what he's saying. So okay, so I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna go right through it. Ready? So starting from the top there, saying, it's good to remain as he is, and are you bound to? So are you married? Well, then don't try to be free because you are married, and that you're married. Don't try to be free from that. You made the decision. But if you're not married, all right, well, don't try to be married then. He's saying, like, it's fine to not marry. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, well, then she has not sinned. And because he's gonna say this next point, which pertains to you. But yes, Ben.
Nah, well, I just remember what I wanted to say earlier. He added that little 17 to 24 because about not remaining where you are as a and then he says in verse like 20. I don't know. But he's saying, like, it's okay to remain unmarried and or to remain married. Like, you don't need to change yourself. That's what he's saying, and that's why he added that little thing, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to
That's what I was trying to say.
remain. But now what you're asking, he's gonna hear. He says, yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. He goes, so this is what I mean, brothers. So the time, the appointed time when Jesus comes back is growing very clear. It's coming. It's going to be soon. Well, not there soon. It's still coming for us, but it's going to come soon. Because he says, from now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. I'm just going to kind of read this again. Those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealing with it. Right? He tells them, so Jesus coming back, and from what I understand from this is that now you can always go and look it up after you end here, because I may not always have the best answer for these kind of questions. I encourage you to do that, but kind of saying, get the mindset out that for if you have a wife, like he says, live as though you had none. Keep thinking about the Lord. You have a wife, focus on the Lord still. Don't focus on your wife. Don't prioritize her first. You have the Lord. And if she does die, and those who mourn, don't focus on the mourning of her because you become slothful and you're not focusing on the Lord, who should be your prioritize. He's not saying you shouldn't feel anything, but he's saying, as it said somewhere else, mourn. It's like, mourn, but then come back together to the Lord. It's not good to stay mournful, because then you try to, as a problem with this generation, you want to stay depressed because it's easier to be depressed than it is to actually focus and work on yourself. And it's easier to focus on your wife than it is to focus on the Lord, and it's easier to mourn than focus on the Lord. And the next part, it's easier to stay happy. It's easier to rejoice with your wife or your husband than to focus on the Lord. And it's easier to buy stuff than it is to focus on the Lord and say, I'm good with what I have. He will provide. And it's easier to deal with the world as you want to deal with the world than to go about the world with a Christian lifestyle, with a Christian walk, because it's easier to do the things that don't focus more on the Lord than it is to do the other. And it's like I said, it's not saying that you can't be human, that you can't have these emotions, but he's saying don't let it cloud your judgment. That's the thing. Because God's never called us to become emotionless, but he's called us for him. Because the key part is this next part. He says, "For the present form of this world is passing away." Because basically, when we go to be with Jesus, and he creates the new earth and he creates the new heaven, well, all this will be meaningless anyway. So he's saying, yes, you can have a wife, you can have a husband, you can mourn, you can rejoice, you can go buy things, you can deal with the world. But just remember, it's kind of meaningless because it's all going to pass away. Focus on the Lord, that's going to be eternal. Not saying you can't, but there's a better objective to this. For those who like, what's the purpose in life? It's all fading away. Well, right here, he's saying the Lord. Be yourself, because he said, you don't have to change yourself for the Lord. Be yourself. Just don't forget that you're now also the Lord's servant. He says, you're bond servants of the Lord. If you do all these things and you forget the Lord, then you become a bond servant of men, which he says do not become. You become a bond servant of the world when you let it overcome you. Does that kind of make sense?
So what you're basically saying is all of these things can be looked at in the worldly perspective, right? You can love your wife the way the Lord loves your wife. You can cry in situations where the world would have you cry. You can be happy in situations where the world will have you be happy. I don't remember, what was the last one. You can buy things of the world that you did not possess before. But what Paul's telling us is that we should not do that. The world is fading. Because the world is fading, we should be looking at things from the Lord's perspective, because the Lord, the way He sees things is eternally. So we should love our wives the way we should eternally love our wives, the way the Lord will love our wife. Uh, we should not weep in the things of the world. Like, let's say, I don't know, like whenever a loved one dies, that was saved, right? We shouldn't be super unhappy in that, because they should be going to heaven, right? We should be rejoicing in that situation. In a worldly situation, you would rejoice in is I don't know. I can't think of one of those. I don't know. You got your drugs this morning. I don't know. God doesn't have us do that, right?
You're thinking more of a we can never do it. And like I said, I may not be putting the best of terms, but it's not that well, I understand, like, of when you say of the world, we can still do it spiritually per se, but it's no, you can do it of the world, you can do it spiritually, but he's saying it's not right to make that the only thing, because look, he says he says a few examples, right? If you have a wife, live as though you had none. You mourn as though they were not mourning. Rejoice as though you and then and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. Those who buy as though they had no goods. As those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. He's saying for the ones who just did that or stayed in that, right? Because he's talking about this remaining, right? He's talking about remaining in the Lord, right? So for the ones who only remain in their wife, for the ones who only remain in mourning, for the ones who only remain in rejoicing, for the ones who only remain in buying stuff, for the ones who only remain in the world, it makes a little more sense because he's not asking us to. He's not telling us to remain in such things. It's not because like I said, if look, he says don't remain in your wife, right? But he also says marriage isn't bad, but it's not that we remain in our wife, but we become one and remain in the Lord. So we remain in the Lord through all these things, but as long as we remain in the Lord, not remaining in just the good times, just in the bad times, just in our partner, just in the world, just in our possessions, right? Does that kind of help?
How did you come to the conclusion that he said not to remain in these things? Where does it talk about that?
Because, all right, because I got to flip my page.
Well, to me, what I feel like he's saying is that, he's talking to the unmarried, basically saying it's like, that you don't have to get married. Like, there's no reason to get married unless, you want to, but there's no like need, like, there's no, requirement to get married. And then he says, in 29, what I mean is like the time is short. Like, there's no, reason or really true purpose. Well, not true. There's no requirement to get married.
All right.
And he tries to like make it like not a big deal. Like, you can still live your life. You can still, do everything you can without getting married. I don't know.
Go look at 24. He says, there
I don't
let
know.
him remain with God. Because the thing is, if you remain in the world, well, he says then the present form of this world is passing away. It's no good if you remain in the world, or you remain in your emotions, or you remain in your possessions, or you remain in your partner, right? But if you remain in God, you become servants of God because we were bought with a price. We are God's. He's just trying to tell us in verse 32, I want you to be free from anxieties. So to remain in God is to be free from these anxieties. That kind of help you there. We're looking at this together. It's not a study for no reason, right?
So I'm gonna reiterate the way I said it earlier.
All right.
There is a worldly perspective, right, and a godly perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing from this section is that, and kind of how y'all have explained it to me, is that whenever you focus too deeply on the worldly side of things, well, I guess not particularly worldly side of things, if you basically idolize a situation or a person above God, all of those things are fleeting except for the Lord. So your wife will not be able to sustain you forever. Your emotions will not be able to sustain you forever, nor will the world itself be able to sustain you forever. The only thing that will be able to is God. So follow God because, wow, you'll be able to have a wife and you'll have times where you need to cry and times where you'll be able to be happy and things like that. You will not be relying on these things for your, I guess, filling your spiritual gauge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because not that we can't be in those things, because we can,
Mm-hmm.
but just not that. But like you said, it's not going to sustain us. See, yeah. See, we're kind of on the same page now, are we?
Okay.
You see that
Yeah.
now? All right, all right. And so it helps with the marriage part because the first thing you said, with the wife, well, a wife or husband won't sustain you, remain with God. Yeah, we're getting there. See, three heads are better than one. All right, so last little bit. So he says, I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman, and the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. Worldly things, how to please her husband. Sorry, yeah. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. Because, like, he's kind of saying, like, the he's kind of giving reasons why it would be better to remain unmarried. He's like, well, the unmarried tend to focus a little bit more on the Lord rather than, like you said, the responsibilities of a married person. That would be your partner, that would be your children, that would be their possessions, what that would be the water bill, that would be the electric bill, that would be like, what is my son or daughter like that I can buy for a Christmas present? What can I do for their birthday? What can I do for my anniversary? All these other things, all these other concerns, like, do I need to buy a new car because my one's broken down for the whole family? And now it's just so many different things. And it's like, well, the unmarried person doesn't have to think that hard about this. And he's like, unmarried better. But yes, Mason.
So basically, Paul is trying to make the unmarried life. Well, I guess he's not trying to make it better. He's giving the pros and cons of both situations,
Exactly.
right? So he's not necessarily making one seem better. It just one is better. So you have more benefits being unmarried
I
than
mean,
if you are married.
yeah, yeah. And you
I
could
mean,
think,
your
yeah.
personal walk and everything. Like Paul obviously has his own problems he deals with,
Mhm.
but like like John Wesley, right? He got married believing God wanted him to get married. If God wanted him to get married, his relationship wouldn't have been horribly messed up like it was, or John Wesley should have been a better husband. But still, uh, if God wanted that to happen, because John Wesley could live without a wife. He literally said the only reason he was doing it is because he believed God was gonna have him was having him get married. It wasn't because he wanted to get married, but he believed God wanted him to get married.
Mhm.
So because of that, John Wesley got married to a woman he barely knew just to fulfill the role that God gave him. He didn't search out a good wife. He didn't search out and know her, make sure they were equally yoked and all of that, and that messed up his ministry. That messed up his problems. Where he would have done 10 times better if he was on his own. His wife he wouldn't have to wait for his wife to come with him, or he wouldn't have to leave her at home and stuff like that. So, and his ministry would have benefited because whenever he talked about marriage, people would be able to take credible advice from him instead of being like, well, if I compare what he's saying to his marriage, and if he does these things and his marriage is like that, then there's a problem. But instead, if he was like Paul and just went around by himself, then he would be fine. He would, oh, I don't know that. He may not have been fine. He may have had some problems as well, but
Yeah.
there's still the difference in that. While someone like Jonathan Edwards was able to not micromanage, multitask all of his situations where his kids, his wife, his ministry life made easier by the fact that his family went with him. So all of these things are just different aspects of this marriage life, the family life, things such as that. Now, I think the main thing Paul's saying is if you do not have to get married and you're perfectly okay without somebody, do not get married. Just don't get married. You will not. It won't benefit you if you can live without a wife. Then you'll be better off in the kingdom with God. If you cannot live without a wife, like it is a necessary thing for you, you have to do it or you'll have problems, right? Then get married. Just realize you will have some difficulties that come along with that. The difference between family life, kids, and all of that, it would be difficult.
And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, you basically just stated the next part. I mean, honestly, but I mean, yeah, because like, well, if being single is so much better, why isn't more people single? Well, it's because this the temptation of a lot of different problems, especially sexual immorality, is just so prominent. Like people like I have to get married. And then some people see marriage as the wrong kind of a thing. They see it just for sex, or they see it just for possessions. People see it just for like the money they can gain out of it when they divorce, which is also not a good thing. I mean, yeah, you have it absolutely correct, because he says in 36, if anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, or towards his virgin, or towards someone unmarried, if his passions are strong and it has to be, let him do as he wishes. Let them marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart, to keep her as his betrothed, he will do as well. So then he who married his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. He's like, hey, if you married, you're doing fine. Nothing's broken. If you remain single, you're doing better, even in my opinion. Because and then his last little statement, he's reiterating, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God saying, just another thing, hey, if you get married, you're bound to your partner, and if they die, well, I mean, you're free to remain or married again, because now you're not by that vow. But he's saying, I think, she can remain or she can marry who she wishes, but he says only in the Lord. So again, to remain or to marry again, think about it, only in the Lord. Get that judgment from the Lord, ask for the wisdom, and say, help me in this decision, and then go about it. Don't think you can do it yourself, like those people that you've mentioned, Wesley and all that. You're like, oh, I got this, and then they fail, they mess it up entirely. He says, yet in my judgment, in my own thinking, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Yeah. So what do y'all think?
Paul likes being single, is what I think.
Paul has no risk game. That's all I can say.
I like how straight he is about it, though. He's not just like,
Of course, Paul's straight. What do you think?
shut up. No, like he speaks straight. He's like, he gives you
He
the
speaks straight.
you don't
What should
understand,
he
like,
speak in catcalls?
I guess direct
Oh,
is
that
what I
right.
mean,
Okay.
Simon. Okay. He tells you what he wants to tell you and lets you come up with your own conclusion. He gives you the facts of both sides and lets you figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
And so through that, Paul is leaving this up to your decision. So it is ultimately up to you whether you get married or whether or not you stay single. Just know that if you can stay single, you should.
And if you can't control your desire for such things, well, then it is better to marry. Because, like you said, because it's kind of like each person's circumstance is different than others. So, not saying that one is better than the other, but one has more benefits, but some people can't live without someone, and this and that, and all of a sudden it's become another if this and that, and but if that, then well, this has to occur, and then this and that, but make peace and this and that. So yeah, this sets good guidelines for us as well, for ones who are going to go maybe marry or maybe stay single. Depends on what the will of God has us. God could just say to all of us, in the near future, nah, y'all remain single. Not for any reason. I just think y'all should. Anyway, yeah. So, Ben or Mason, who would like to pray us out if there's no further questions?
I'm okay with praying if Ben's all right with it.
It's all right. I'm all right. Yep.
Okay. I'll pray something.
All right.
Lord, thank you for this Bible study. Thank you for allowing me to join in and to catch on to what we were reading. Be with us, Lord, as we retain this information. Help us to hold on to it and keep it for later in life, Lord. I guess not even later, Lord. That if you have us single now, you keep us single now, Lord, and that we listen to you. If you have us preparing for marriage, Lord, which I doubt, that we'll be prepared for that as well, Lord. Help us to take this information, keep it in our minds, and use it to better our relationship with you, Lord, and in the future, better it with a significant other. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.